As you know better than anybody, the discourse has devolved into a level of cruelty that we haven't seen before. What was disqualifying just a few years ago
Right.
now not only feels fine, acceptable, but actually rewarded. You have administration officials saying that the victims of ISIS aggression are domestic terrorists. You have J.D. Vance coming out and saying that it's okay. You don't have to apologize for being white. Just days ago, Donald Trump put a picture of your face on an ape's body. And so again, this is kind of, we've seen the de-evolution of the
Right.
discourse. How do we come back from a place that we have fallen into?
It's going to be because we, citizens, are activated and paying attention and saying enough and saying, you know, we have a different idea of what the American family should look like and community should look like. And that is what I'm seeing across the board. So, I was on a panel a while back, and I said, a lot of the values that we say we subscribe to during easy times, during peaceful times, it's easy to say we believe in those things
Right, when they're not challenged.
when they're not challenged. It's easy to believe in free speech when it doesn't seem like the government's trying to crack down on free speech. It's easy to say that we believe in the golden rule when we aren't at risk of being arrested when we exercise the golden rule.
Yeah.
Right now, we're being tested, and the good news is what we saw in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and what we're seeing in places across the country, including here in Los Angeles, has been the American people saying, no, you know what, at least a good number of the American people saying, we're going to live up to those values that we say we believe in. And as long as we have folks doing that, I feel like we're going to get through this.
So I hear and appreciate what you're saying about the agency of individuals. As we look toward our elected officials, our democratic leaders, I think something that I've been having a lot of trouble reconciling is, for so long it's felt like Democrats are solely focused on protecting norms, institutions,
Right.
processes, and then you've got a Republican Party that sees what it wants and will find a way to get it. Laws be damned, Constitution be
Right.
damned, rules be damned. And we're seeing that play out right now. And so, given this massive asymmetry, where it often leaves us feeling like it's a Lucy pulling the football away from Charlie Brown over and over and over again situation, what needs to be done? And do you think that our Democratic leadership and our Democratic elected officials understand that for the first time?
Well, look, I think we have to acknowledge that we've got the harder job, right? So we believe in government as a tool for good, as a potential force to create more jobs, and as a way to make sure that the planet doesn't roast, to make sure that as we move forward and the economy grows, that everybody and not just some are benefiting, and that kids are getting a good education. And what that means is that we have to think about the consequences of our actions. We have to try to figure out how do we get working majorities to actually pass laws and to implement those laws and to make things happen. Tearing stuff down doesn't require all that. So when you talk about Republicans, for example, it seems like they see what they want and they just go after it. Well, they've passed one significant piece of legislation since they've been, for all the hoopla, they haven't actually codified and institutionalized much of anything. They have poured a huge amount of money into ICE and their immigration agenda. And they've cut taxes for really wealthy people. And now they're trying to unravel a bunch of rules and norms and laws that are already in place. That's an easier job. So I say that because we should accept the responsibility and the challenge that our job's going to be a little bit harder. because in order for us to get stuff done, like let's say the Affordable Care Act, well, we've got to cobble together a majority, and we've got to persuade, and we've got to convince. And so I do think that there's been some unwillingness on the part of Democrats in the past to break down some of the institutional barriers for us getting stuff done, just because, well, it's always been done that way. And I'll give you an example that frustrated the heck out of me when I was president, which was the filibuster in the Senate. The Senate is already structurally skewed and anti-majoritarian, right? It's hard for majorities to get stuff done, whether it's trying to pass civil rights legislation in the 60s or trying to get gun control legislation or what have you, because even though majority people support it, Delaware and Wyoming have the same number of senators as California, right? All right, so that would require a constitutional amendment. You then compound that with a filibuster, and the truth is that Democrats for some time have been traditionalists in wanting to preserve that, when it blocks us from making government effective, which in turn makes people feel like government is corrupt and not caring about them.
Which lends itself
to the kind of, it gives folks like Trump an opening, right? So redistricting is another good example of where I strongly believe we should not be having politicians draw lines that determine who's voting for them. We should have voters decide who their politicians are. And I've worked with Eric Holder to help set up the terrific work that the NDRC has been doing to try to make sure that we have fair maps. But the fact that Governor Newsom here in California and others said, well, if they're going to try to gerrymander their way out of losing this upcoming midterm, then we're going to respond. And we're going to respond in a lawful way where we put it up to a referendum and let people decide and not just give away the store because of traditions. That was the right response. So I do think that I don't want us to simply duplicate the behavior of the other side. I don't want us to have a slash and burn strategy where we don't care about rule of law. We don't care about some of the guardrails around our democracy. We start lying and having no regard for the truth the way the other side seems to be comfortable with right now. Because if that's how we fight, then we lose what we're fighting for. But that doesn't mean we have to get punked or be saps. And I do, or to cling to traditions just for the sake of tradition. I think what we have to continually evaluate is, in this moment in time, how do we make sure that we can advance our agenda in a way that reflects what's good for ordinary folks, not special interests, not simply the well-to-do, and how do we do that in a way that's consistent with integrity, honesty, democracy, the values that we claim to want to uphold? And I think it's possible to do that. But the reason I started with reminding ourselves, yes, we have a harder job, because sometimes I think we're tough on Democrats, saying, why aren't you being as mean and tough and nasty as they are? Well, it's when I was president of the United States, I suppose I could have simply unilaterally ordered the military to, go into some red state and harass and intimidate a governor there, or cut off funding for states that didn't vote for me. I could have exercised that prerogative, but that is contrary to how I think our democracy is supposed to work. And I think we shouldn't get discouraged by the fact that we have a tougher job. What we should do is expect that our side is smart enough to figure it out.
So you had mentioned persuasion, and I think that that's a really good point here, because as we eventually head toward a next general election cycle, we're going to be contending with a lot of the same infighting that's plagued Democrats before. You'll often have leftists and progressives butting up against liberals and moderates. And look, you are the ultimate pragmatist. And so what advice do you have as we head toward this election cycle, this eventual 2028 election cycle, so that we don't devolve into the same, 2016 era Bernie Hillary redux that feels like it always consumes the left?
Well, look, first of all, I think it's important to remember that the divisions in the Democratic Party tend to get magnified in the media. Relative to the divides that exist in most other countries, where you have a parliamentary system, you have multiple parties, and you got Green Party, and you got the center left party, and you've got a socialist party, and sometimes you got a communist party.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our differences get exaggerated. Listen, Bernie Sanders believes, just like Nancy Pelosi believes, just like Chuck Schumer believes, just like Hakeem Jeffries believes, just like AOC believes, in equality and non-discrimination against people because of race or gender or sexual orientation. Well, all Democrats believe in that. That's a core value. Democrats believe that government should provide a strong safety net for people when they're down on their luck. Everybody I just mentioned believes in that. Everybody believes that there should be some regulation of the market so that you don't have monopolies and oligopolies that are simply dictating the terms of the economy, and that we should have a tax system that levels out some of the inequalities that result. So I think it's important for us to remind ourselves as a starting point, what do we have in common? Most of the time, the differences are tactical. Right? It has to do with, well, how much of a tax hike can people put up with? How much regulation should we be thinking about when it comes to climate change? And if we recognize that typically the arguments in the Democratic Party aren't about core values, but are really around tactics and how do you get stuff done, now we can have a robust debate. And I want a robust debate.
Yeah.
And what we can also do is not try to nationalize every issue all the time. This last off-year election, I think, was a great example. You've got a candidate like Spanberger in Virginia, who runs what would be considered a more centrist campaign and runs a terrific campaign. And then you've got Mondami in New York, who runs a explicitly socialist grassroots campaign and excites and mobilizes folks. And that can win in New York City. It probably could not win in Virginia. And that's okay. That's healthy.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think we get into arguments. A recent one, this idea that the quote unquote abundance agenda is somehow a sellout, and folks on the left getting exercised because this is part of this sort of corporate Democrats trying to take over the party. Well, no, not really. What I think it is entirely legitimate to say, for example, we need to build more affordable housing, which is going to require higher taxes on people like me and people who are well off in order to subsidize the construction of affordable housing, let's say in a place like California, and also be able to say, you know what, there are a bunch of well-intentioned rules and zoning laws and so forth that baby boomers like me and existing homeowners have used to block the construction of affordable housing, even in democratic cities. And so if we want to actually deliver housing rather than have some abstract argument, then we got to figure out not an either or of do we spend more money or do we reform some of these things that are preventing the construction of affordable housing. We have to do both. And I want us to have those arguments. And one last thing I think that's I've noticed in a lot of our internal arguments, a lot of which, by the way, are taking place online, and ordinary voters, this is all completely off their radar screen. Yeah. One of the things I think it's important for Democrats, for us also to recognize, progressives to recognize, folks on the left to recognize, it's possible for us to have a moral sense of what is right and true and what needs to be done, and also recognize that we are in a particular time and place here in America, and voters are not going to agree with us 100% on everything. And so it is not a sellout, it's not a betrayal to say that we're going to shape our agenda and our message in a way that allows us to build a working majority to get stuff done. And I think particularly around social issues, sometimes we get confused around this. You witness what happened in Minneapolis, and you say to yourself, morally speaking, that 5-year-old child who's standing in front of that SUV as his father's being dragged off, that child is equal to mine or any child. His immigration status, his nationality, does not change the love and decency that we should be showing that child. But what is also true is that we're a nation of laws, we have borders, and we've got to figure out an immigration policy that is orderly and that is fair and is enforced in a sensible way that is compatible with our values, but may not fully capture the degree to which that kid should have the same chances in life as a U.S. citizen kid. But, we've got to accommodate the reality that the majority of the American people think that there's a difference between somebody who's a U.S. citizen and somebody who's not, and that they want an orderly immigration system. And sometimes I think what happens in the online debate is if somebody suggests, well, we have to have some immigration enforcement, then somebody's going to point at that child and say, so you don't care about that kid, so you must be a bad person. The same would be true, let's say, here in Los Angeles around the homeless issue. I think morally, ethically speaking, it is an atrocity that in a country this wealthy we have people just on the streets. And we should have we should insist on policies that recognize their full humanity, people who are houseless, and be able to provide them the help and resources that they need.
The political climate in America has been marred by increasingly personal and inflammatory rhetoric, with former President Donald Trump at the center of controversy. One of the most notorious incidents occurred when Trump, during a rally, publicly referred to Barack Obama with a racially charged slur, calling him an ape. This comment drew widespread condemnation and was widely perceived as an attempt to dehumanize the former president, fueling racial tensions and underscoring the volatile nature of current political discourse. The incident marked a significant escalation in the tone of political exchanges, reflecting a broader trend of polarization and incivility that many commentators say has undermined the norms of American democracy. Critics argue that such language not only diminishes the quality of political debate, but also emboldens divisive sentiments among supporters and detractors alike. As the nation approaches the upcoming election cycle, the landscape is increasingly fraught with these contentious exchanges. The political stakes are high, with both parties mobilizing their bases amid a backdrop of economic challenges, social unrest, and debates over democratic norms. The focus remains sharply on how the political rhetoric will shape voter perceptions and influence the outcome. The repeated use of incendiary language by Trump, including the infamous comment about Obama, has become emblematic of a style that many see as destructive to the fabric of American political culture. It raises urgent questions about the future of civility in politics, and whether the country can recover from such heated and often personal battles. Amid this environment, there is a growing call for leaders and citizens to recommit to principles of decency, respect, and constructive engagement. The coming elections are seen as a pivotal moment, an opportunity for the American people to decide whether to continue down a path marked by inflammatory rhetoric or to embrace a more unified and respectful political discourse. As campaigns heat up, the focus will undoubtedly be on whether candidates can rise above the noise, address issues substantively, and restore a sense of integrity and civility to American politics. The legacy of past comments, especially those as egregious as the racist slur directed at Obama, continues to influence discourse, serving as a stark reminder of the importance of maintaining dignity and respect in the pursuit of democracy.